Welcome to Coffee&Regs, a CSS RegTech podcast series on moving from a tactical to strategic approach to regulatory compliance.
Hi, this is Natalie Silverman for CSS. Welcome to our next episode of Coffee&Regs. On today's episode, we're talking about regulatory examinations, SEC priorities, and insights into how compliance teams can be more proactive before the regulators come knocking. Please welcome our CCO experts, Korrine Kohm and Dan Haynes. Good morning, Korrine and Dan, and thanks for sitting down for Coffee&Regs.
Thanks, Natalie. So, Dan, there's been so much focus on regulatory examinations recently, and I know that we're seeing the SEC being really, really active in the space of examinations, both of newly registered advisors as well as firms that have not been registered for a while. So very much in line with the SEC priorities. So what are your initial thoughts on the regulatory examination kind of environment these days?
I would say that, first off, we know examinations are such a stressful time for an advisor. Both of us having been in-house, it is something that you kind of have in the back of your mind. You're always worried about, are we going to be examined? We get a lot of questions from firms saying, what does an examination look like? When can I be examined? What can I expect? And so I think that talking about this topic is really important to hopefully give firms a sense of comfort and a little bit of insight as to what they can expect during an examination. But you're absolutely right. We are seeing that examinations are up. The SEC is very active. And while we don't have any data right now for 2021, the most recent data we have is from the SEC publishes their exam results on an annual basis. And in 2020, they conducted roughly 3,000 exams. And that's only down, that's actually down a little bit from 2019, only down about 4%. And I think that the large reason for that is the pandemic that we went through, that we're continuing to operate through. But I don't think the pandemic has really slowed down the SEC as much as we might think. And so the examiners are looking at doing examinations remotely. They've been doing it remotely for quite some time now, and I don't see any shift in that, at least in the near future. And these remote examinations are being done largely a lot of times through Zoom or other kind of video conferencing, but we're seeing more and more where these examinations are just being done via audio. And I think that this is great. I think this gives advisors a little bit of pressure off of them to not be visual with the examiners, and allows for a little bit of communication off screen between the advisors. You know, we have the standard kick somebody under the table when they're talking too much. This certainly allows for firms to communicate one-on-one with each other without having the examiners privy to that. And I think it does end up being a benefit. But going remotely with these examinations also seems to be resulting in examinations just taking longer from start to finish. I think that the initial requests, responses are typical. Usually you get about 10 to 14 days to respond to an initial request. But the follow-up, I think that's more often than not, the follow-up is delayed. And I don't want to put too much weight in an anecdotal experience, but one firm that I'm presently working with, they waited 2 months from the document production to then have a discussion about their compliance program. So there's this huge rush. It was, we got this exam. We have to get all this documentation together. Let's do it. Let's meet the deadlines. And then it was a hurry up and wait scenario. So I think that advisors should be prepared to have the experience and the examination just to take a lot longer than expected or than previously. Also, as we look at examinations, what we see now is that we have new leadership at the SEC, and this could certainly trigger a different approach to examinations. Exams can take certainly different tones based upon the priorities, goals, and candidly, the individuals that are conducting the exam. And sometimes exams are viewed as, trying to be helpful, understanding that advisors aren't perfect, that they're hoping to strengthen a compliance program, looking for opportunities to get better. And other times, exams can take a little bit more of a rigorous or draconian approach in that a request could be, your manual on page X says Y, where is it? And so it remains to be seen, I think, how the new leadership will set the tone But there's a difference between tone and priorities. And luckily, the examiners publish their priorities annually in an effort to promote transparency and, candidly, consistency across its offices. And what we're seeing is that examiners are really taking to heart the 2021 SEC examination priorities. If you're so inclined to learn more about the priorities, read them in detail, see exactly what the examiner said, they're a quick Google search away. So I'm not going to bore you by reading what the examination priorities are. But in terms of things to be aware of, some takeaways from the priorities, we're seeing a really big and consistent focus on fees, and namely advisory and wrap fees. And Korrine, I know you're going to talk a little bit more about the advisory fees and what the expectations are. But they want to make sure that there's clear and consistent disclosure, firms have policies and procedures, and that disclosure of fees really feeds into some focus on Form CRS. So if you think about it, Form CRS is one of the newer regulations that advisors are dealing with. And so the SEC is now going through and looking at saying, all right, well, is there even a Form CRS created? And is that CRS even any good? Are you meeting all the requirements that are laid forth? So we've got fees, we've got Form CRS deficiencies, and we also, it wouldn't be a list of exam priorities without cybersecurity. I think it's been included now for the last 8 to 9 years worth of priorities. We've seen numerous risk alerts. We see cybersecurity only examinations. And just recently saw, and is something I want to talk about here with SEC Chair Gary Gensler's comments to the United States Senate. And for those of you that are listening later on, his comments were made on September 14th, 2021. And in his comments, he talked about how the SEC may soon propose a rule that would require firms to have standardized cybersecurity systems and to monitor their digital risks. So they're talking about laying out the systems firms should have and how they have to manage their risks. It also looks to lay out expectations for what a firm should do to handle the after effects of a hack or some other kind of similar incident. And to this, I say, finally, thus far, the approach from the regulators has been, well, there's no one-size-fits-all approach. It has to be tailored to your firm. And while that is still very much applicable and will always be applicable, it needs to be tailored to your firm, there's candidly been little substantive guidance or requirements, and they've been more like best practices. And in my discussions with firms, both in-house and as a consultant, it's most firms, most IT professionals would very much welcome some specifics, some requirements. Most of them say, whatever we're supposed to do, we'll do it. Just tell us what it is. And hopefully with a proposed rule, we would get some specifics so that you can point to what exactly is being required of firms as it relates to cyber. And this continues the SEC's focus. If you looked at the mid-year agenda, the SEC mentioned that they want to have a cybersecurity rule, hopefully in this year. So all signs are pointing towards this being a continued focus. And this means it should be a continued focus for everyone. And candidly, it should be a continued focus for everyone, regardless of what industry you're in, not necessarily just for advisors. But Korrine, that is looking at things kind of globally. So I'm curious the kinds of things that you're seeing in terms of helping our clients navigate exams that maybe aren't laid out within those examination priorities or official communications from the SEC.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, we have a really great position in what we do, that we have the ability to look in and see what the SEC are asking during regulatory examinations, because we help all of our clients with their exams. So it gives us a real great insight into it. I always say we're like the fly on the wall to kind of see what's going on. And I think that what trends that we have seen are on point with the exam priorities. And then there are those that are ancillary. The exam priorities definitely focused on the protection of retail investors and retirement assets. So I think when we see such a focus by examiners on advisory fees and disclosure of advisory fees and testing of it, that's kind of part and parcel of that protection of the retail client. I definitely see a significant focus on not just looking at a signed advisory agreement and comparing it to the portfolio management system to see, does one match the other. We're actually seeing examiners now dig really into the fees, including, are there householding of assets? If so, have all the whole household assets been accounted for when the fee structure has been determined? Because a lot of advisors do things on a tiered fee schedule. So are you hitting those breakpoints? Where is the disclosure about, how you're going to account for cash flows in and out? We're really seeing the examiners spend a significant amount of time looking at that particular focus. So, one key takeaway for anybody listening in would be, if you haven't done a fee bill review, now's the time to do it. We've had clients of ours that have actually done a full inventory of every single client, making sure that the IMA matches the fee calculation that is being charged to the client to make sure that it's accurate, and do the testing, do the same testing that the SEC is going to do. So that's one area that we definitely see. Another area, which kind of was a surprise when we first saw it on this document request letter from the New York office of the SEC, was a request for not just a holdings report, but also a trade blotter that accounted for all the activity and trades, not by just the firm in the client's accounts, but also the trading activity of access persons within the organization. So as you know, access persons within a registered investment advisor need to report the personal securities transactions. So what the SEC wants to do is they want to do a side-by-side comparison of employees' trades versus the firm trade to look for conflicts of interest. And then they're going to look at your code of ethics to determine, well, what is your policies about things like blackout or restrictions or timing? Are you front running? Are you blocking your employees' trades with your clients' trades? And if so, has that been disclosed? So for firms that are not utilizing a code of ethics reporting system, that's a very, very difficult request to respond to. I speak personally because when I was in-house CCO many years ago, we didn't have a system. I would get brokerage statements in the mail for all of our clients, or if I was lucky, in an email format so I can take a look at it. How would I even have responded to a response like that, Dan, right? It's just almost like impossible.
I've actually implemented one of those systems in two different firms, and it was a huge win, for everyone. And yeah, to your point, it would be impossible to be able to respond without a system like that. And a quick plug is if you look at some of our other podcasts or recordings, I've actually talked about the code of ethics reporting systems and how that can make your life easier. So I think that really dovetails nicely into what we're seeing with examinations and how they can go a little bit smoother.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the other things that we're definitely seeing trends on is, if you are a newly registered advisor, you can expect to be examined, not within the first 18 months of being examined, not within the first 12 months, but probably within the first 5 to 6 months. We have seen a significant increase in newly registered advisors being examined within 3 to 4 months of just even opening their doors. Mm-hmm. And obviously that can be really, really challenging, especially if whoever is the named CCO is new to the role and is new to understanding the compliance obligations and responsibilities. So be ready right from, out of the gate, be ready to make sure you understand what are the rules, but more importantly, what do your policies say? And are you doing what your policy says? To your point earlier, Dan, you mentioned that if you have a policy that says, I will do X, Y, Z, 4 times a year, how are you making sure you do that? Because the examiners are going to want you to substantiate that you are doing those tasks that you've outlined in your manual. So I guess a few more additional little takeaways for you is, one, if you haven't been examined in a while, expect to be examined, because I think it is very inevitable. Examiners are doing multiple exams at once, which means they can get to more firms, but it might also, to your point, Dan, it might take a little bit longer to get through the exam because the exam team may be doing 4 or 5 exams at once versus how they used to do it pre-COVID. Figure out, if you haven't looked at a recent document request letter, what they're asking for has changed. So get your hands on a copy of one and go through, whether it's 20 items, or I've seen an initial document request letter for a fully established firm be almost 52 items on just the doc request, the first one. That's not even accounting for the subsequent requests that you're going to have afterwards. And then, what technology do you have? Because the SEC is asking not just those questions on what are your cybersecurity infrastructure and how do you protect your clients' information from hacking and things like that and security breaches, but what are the technology solutions you have in place for compliance? How are you doing a side-by-side review of employees' accounts versus firm accounts to make sure there's no code of ethics? How are you verifying that clients are being billed correctly? All these things that, are mentioned in either the exam priority letters or that we're seeing right now, they're things that you should be doing on a, periodic basis anyway. So look at your code of ethics tool. If you don't have one, as Dan just said, it might be something you want to look into, even if it's 4 or 5 employees. I mean, it's worth it. And especially to answer, think about the amount of time you save annually that you could focus that time in other areas of your compliance system. So trade blotter analysis. If you are an active trader or a firm that does a lot of active trading, how are you looking at your trade blotter in an analytical sense to compare it then to what you've disclosed? One other thing that just recently we're seeing more focused on, and it's kind of part and parcel to some of the things we just mentioned, is sub-advisory relationships. The SEC seems to be really, really digging on the various different layers of fees that are charged by advisors when you have sub-advisory relationships. And more importantly, where is the disclosure to the end client on the various different fees that they're being charged? And I think it's kind of, as we said, ancillary to the focus on the attention to protecting the retail clients and those that are saving for retirement. They want to ensure that a client understands the layer of fees. So take a look at the IMA that the client signs. Is there a dual contract if you use a sub-advisor? Because you want to make sure that the client fully understands that they're paying one fee for maybe advisory services and maybe another additional fee, could be if it's not built in, for sub-advisory. So I think it's really important right now that you, as a compliance professional listening in, or CFO or chief operating officer, look into that really detailed and make sure that the systems are in place as well as the disclosure is in place.
I think that goes into the old adage of follow the money, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think there's a huge conflict whenever you're able to take money from a client and put it in your own pocket. There better be a lot of controls, a lot of eyes on that. And that's what the examiners are going to do. And to your point about that, the implementation of technology, the SEC actually in November of last year published a risk alert talking about how a lot of firms have seen tremendous growth. And that's been great. But has the compliance program grown along with that? Right. And so everything costs money, and we're not here to spend anyone's money. But I think it's a something to look at. If you've seen the firm grow substantially, whether it be in terms of assets, revenue, products, clients, employees, however you want to define growth, has compliance grown along with it? Or does that you still have that one person who has it as their side job and not getting any additional resources?
Yeah. And I think, as an industry trend that has continued to increase, which is the amount of mergers and acquisitions that advisory firms are doing, that could be a huge area that you've had growth because you've just acquired a firm. And so the question is, the SEC is going to want to know as of day one, how did you integrate those systems? Mm-hmm. And they're going to want to know when, you integrated that, what failures did you have? What successes did you have? And finally, I know they really want to know about the investment story. So make sure that the individuals that you put in front of the exam team, when it comes to whether it is a phone call conversation, or I know myself, I've participated on Zoom interviews with the SEC to assist our advisory clients, that whoever you present for those interviews is able to speak to the story of the firm, not just the background of the firm, but really what is the story of their investment strategy? How do they do their research process? What is used to substantiate that research process? Because we're also seeing a very detailed focus on that. And let's not even get into if your firm does things like, ESG investing or cryptocurrency or anything kind of esoteric in that regard. Because then they're really, really going to keep digging in deeper, because they just want to make sure, have you fully disclosed your risks, the volatility that the client's assets may be invested in. I hate to say it, but as we know, even with the marketing rule, there's going to be new added questions to the ADV in the coming year to address the marketing rule. And, with the new cyber, maybe potential proposed rule, we may now start to see questions on the ADV about, have you been subject to a breach or have you been hacked? I mean, anything is really up in the air when it comes to the SEC. So this just kind of gave a general view of regulatory examinations and what we're seeing here at CSS. Really biggest takeaway, prepare, prepare, prepare. If you haven't been through one in a while, make sure you prepare for it. If you have been through an exam, don't be complacent. Make sure that you've resolved anything that maybe was included in a deficiency letter. And if you were one of those really fortunate firms, which we've been really happy to work with clients that have gotten no deficiency, but don't be complacent because they can come knocking, and you want to make sure that you keep maintaining that really strong, reasonably designed compliance program. In the words of the SEC.
No, that's a great point. And, you talked about the new registrants being examined a little early on, or maybe earlier than expected. The only thing that I'll add is that a lot of times we see with these firms, there's so much involved with getting a firm up and running. Whether you're getting paperwork signed, you're working with implementing systems, there's a lot that happens to get a firm registered and up and running. And sometimes compliance gets set aside. And it's a call to action for those firms to recognize, unfortunately, there's no runway to, eventually get up and running. You need to be paying attention to your policies and procedures from the beginning, in addition to all the other stuff you have to do for running the business.
Yeah. And that's why, just as you spend the resources on things like a portfolio management system and research and technology, spend the resources on compliance, because as Dan, I know, as you love to say, compliance may not be a revenue generating area, but it could sure save you a lot of money in the end of the day if you do it right.
Thanks, Dan and Korrine, for the insight into how you like your regs in the morning. For CSS, this is Natalie Silverman.
This has been another episode of Coffee and Regs, a CSS RegTech podcast series. Make sure you catch every episode by subscribing to our podcast on www.cssregtech.com or through your podcast platform of choice. Thanks so much for tuning in. This podcast is brought to you by Compliance Solutions Strategies and is for general information purposes only. All rights reserved.